Hi, I'm Rashanah Baldwin, a journalist, a Chicagoan, and a millennial bringing light to everyday stories that matter. I share the type of stories that mainstream media ignores or gets wrong. The news of the neighborhoods, the news that matters. Here is someone you need to know. Meet Ted Williams. Meet Ted Williams. You are the chairman of social science and you're a professor of political science at Kennedy King College. How are you?
Yes, I'm well. How are you?
How long have you been at Kennedy King College doing amazing work?
I have been at Kennedy King College since 2005 full-time and 2003 part-time.
It's a lot going on in our country, in our world, in our city of Chicago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you're the person who knows all about politics, civic engagement, and I want to talk to you about, one, being a millennial on the south side of Chicago and hearing so many of my peers not saying that they're going to vote or they don't really believe their voice matters. How do we get Black millennials or Black people in general to really understand that their voice really does matter through voting, especially seeing as how people always say each election is this election is the most important. How do we get them to really understand that this one is more really important?
No, this election is the most important, okay? I don't care what anybody said to you before. This one, I just wrote an article for the Southland Journal and for Bronzeville Life, literally called the election of our lifetime. I'll share it with you afterwards. And then I'm doing a series of voter videos about the urgency of now, right? Why we have to vote. One of those just came out today. I'll share that with you as well. The point is that what we must understand is that politics is about us figuring out who gets what, where, why, and how, and determining the resources for our community, but then also determining what is right for our society and our community as well. And so in doing that, we have to take every opportunity that we have to influence the process. And so this is a great opportunity, this season, this time, to make sure that we do that. And, you know, there's an old phrase that says, if you don't vote, you can't complain. I understand that education funding, housing funding, roads, clean water, clean air, college funding, all these things happen based on the political process. And so if you don't participate in that, you really miss the opportunity to affect your community. And that's what this election is about. We have a president on the ballot, a senator on the ballot, the Congress on the ballot, the Water Reclamation District, state representatives, state senators, all of those things are very important. The state Supreme Court, we have referendum questions. We have to get engaged.
How do we get individuals who feel like, well, we already know Illinois is a Democratic state, it's a blue state. And I've talked to many people who are not happy with either party. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten the feedback, it doesn't matter how I'm gonna vote because Illinois is a blue state. What do you say to that? And they say,
so the Electoral College is what determines how we move, right? So Illinois has 20 electoral votes, and so Illinois is a blue state. I would suggest that whether Joe Biden wins by 1 vote or 10,000 votes doesn't really matter in Illinois. That's the reality. Joe Biden's going to win Illinois. But where your vote really does matter is on questions like the fair tax question, questions like who your state rep is going to be, your state senator, your congressman, your senator. Those questions matter tremendously. And as a result, the idea that our votes don't matter is really foolish in that way. I would say, even in the presidency, nothing is a foregone conclusion. Texas is a red state, Republican state, but many people think Texas is going to go blue this year. And so I just think that we've got to continue to vote and make our will known as the people. And I would not fall into that trap. People died so that we could have the right to vote. And I'll talk to you about a little of that if you want, some of that history. But it's very important that we understand the opportunity we have.
What do you say to your own students who may say to you, you know what, I don't want to vote for, since Illinois is a predominantly blue state and we see a lot of most times Black people are voting Democrat and they feel, well, Kamala Harris did this back in the day and she was against a lot of the, harsh sentencing and as well as Biden and our president now who people are saying, oh, he's got the Black agenda. What do you say to that? I want to say, when I've seen that in the responses, I didn't go to HBCU. I don't see anything that he's done for our community directly. If you can't condone, if you cannot end or say or call out racism, then you don't have my vote. But what do you say to that? What do you say to your young students that you teach at Kennedy King College, young Black students in the city who kind of lean that way and said, my dad was in jail for years and my uncle, and what do you say to that?
So first of all, this election, I hate to be overly dramatic. This election may be between good and evil. I mean, it really may be. It may be very well between moving forward in this country or making the country what it was 40 years ago. What does make America great again actually mean? I don't think anyone's ever answered that question. And I always ask people when I have these debates and conversations, I go, well, what year do you want to go back to, right? You want to go back to 1950, 1940, 1930, 1960. When I check my history books, none of those times were good for us. And so I think it is a foolish idea to make the perfect the enemy of the good. And that is what we do by holding Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to this standard of perfection. Yes, Joe Biden signed the crime bill in 1994, but the crime bill of 1994, number one, was a bipartisan effort. Many Democrats and Republicans, Black folks, white folks, a lot of people in the 90s thought that the way to deal with crime was 3 strikes, you're outlaws, 100,000 more police officers is what they did, and really sort of clamping down on these issues. Joe Biden has been sensible enough to admit that he was wrong about the crime bill. And so when you look at that, you realize he's comparing himself to a person in the White House who would never admit that he's wrong about anything. Ever. Have you ever heard our current president say that he's wrong about anything? And the answer is no. So I would rather deal with someone, I read Bill Clinton's autobiography years ago, and he made this statement I thought was so interesting around why he became a Democrat. And he said that he was having a conversation with someone one time, and they said their choice of decision was like this. They said that Republicans have a head and not a heart, and Democrats have a heart and not a head sometimes. And I'd rather take the side that has the heart and not the head, because you can always fix the head later if the heart is in the right place. And I thought that was a very accurate way to look at this situation. Yes, the Democrats do not have everything right, but at least they have been willing to try to address the ways that they have messed it up. At least they are willing to address the idea that systemic racism exists in this country, where you have the Republican Party that won't even admit that it exists. What can I do with that, right? So I am going to take an imperfect Democrat, work with them. In politics, there are no permanent friends nor permanent enemies, only permanent interest. And so you have to, for everyone, tell them what your interests are. Who you be with, things that make you smile, what numbers you dial, as Biggie would say, right? You wouldn't expect that, Rashanah. So, but you have to tell them what is important to you, and then you have to hold them accountable to that. And if you don't hold them accountable, who's to blame? You or them for your issues not being dealt with? I would suggest you may be just as much to blame as they are.
Ted Williams, what does that mean to hold the elected officials accountable? When I talk to my peers and talk to colleagues who are my generation and younger, they don't understand what that means. I understand what accountability looks like with elected officials. I'm a journalist by trade. I'm going to call them out. I'm going to show up where they're at. Well, what does that look like for someone who is not as savvy to civics and politics to hold you accountable?
Yeah, so it can be as simple as going to your local school board meetings, your local aldermanic meetings, and asking questions and saying, hey, well, how come we don't have any lights on our streets? You know what I mean? Like, I'd like to see some lights. That's not that difficult. That takes an hour out of your month to go pop up at one of these meetings. It may be as simple as looking at a news article and then sending an email to the public official or making a phone call. All the numbers are public record. You can call in. It takes you all of 60 seconds. Hey, I'm a resident in your area and I don't agree with, say, the fair tax or whatever it is. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't be agreeing with fair tax, but let's just say whatever it is. And I want to make my voice heard. That's it. Democracy takes work, folks, and it requires us to be engaged. And yes, it's not always going to look like you'll see immediate results right away, But, you know, there's an old scriptural principle that says you have not because you ask not. And you're not going to get anything if you don't push an agenda. And that, to me, is what it means at a very small level to hold them accountable. And then they can do the things that you're doing, right, at a larger level. But there are many, many points at which you can get engaged in the process. So I don't think there's any excuse. I mean, you can retweet things. You can, you know, when people email you, you know, these petitions online, take 2 seconds to sign it and push it forward. Those are ways that you hold people accountable. I think it's important.
And it's unfortunate that I think we live in a world where people just continue to make excuses. And I do feel like everyone, America, the world is on the internet, that everything, you're at home teaching your kids 3rd grade on Zoom. So you have no right to complain about you don't have access, you can't Google. And that's my soapbox. But my next question is, how important is local politics? How important is local election?
Yeah, so they say
in this current election, the presidency.
Well, I mean, let's put it this way: we are in an unprecedented time right now. This pandemic has killed 220,000 people, and we have the highest number of cases and deaths in the entire world. Of 193 United Nations countries, we have the highest number. So the federal government matters. State and local politics, I would say, are very important. But in the face of this pandemic, I would suggest the federal government does have a larger role to play. There's not anything that the state and local governments can do to mitigate this virus that if they don't have the help of the federal government, right? So I'm a federalist in that way. I'm always thinking about the role of the federal government. State and local elections do matter. They matter for school funding. They matter for clean water. They matter for roads. They matter for zoning and what kind of businesses are in your neighborhood. They matter for local gun legislation and that sort of thing. That's where it does matter. And so it's not a either or, but it's a both and. They both matter.
What about accountability?
Yeah, absolutely, accountability. And I think it's important. You know, the aldermanic race, I ran for alderman in the city back in 2015. There's about 60,000 people in our ward where I ran. And aldermanic races can be won by a couple hundred votes. And the alderman has a menu, is what they call it, a certain amount of money, millions of dollars they can use for whatever they decide to use in the community. But if you don't hear from people, they're not going to really engage. So I would teach my students in politics, there are 3 M's: money, media, and mobilization, right? Money, media, mobilization, they drive it. So if you are not mobilized, if you're not running the media, if you don't have money, they don't listen to you. But there are ways to mobilize, there's ways to get involved in the media as young people. And senior citizens are much more politically active. And so the politicians typically go towards the seniors because they know the young people are not as engaged. And so for me, I am a firm advocate for making young people for having young people make their voices heard.
Speaking of which, the Gen Z generation, and some of them are turning 18 most recently. What do you say to them who's like, I don't know where to start. How do I find a cause? How do I get politically active? How do I get, not even politically active, civically active? What's the first step? If you would say, give them a 3-step of why to vote and how to get engaged to understand their voice matters or vote.
Yeah, so I think that all of us can open up our eyes and find things that that you're passionate about in your community, right? You know, whether it's children, whether it is the environment. You know, my kids are like environmentalists, right? So they don't like me using plastic straws, and they want to have a sustainable house and all this other kind of stuff, right? And everyone can get involved at that level. So I would say find that thing. Number 2, I would suggest that don't reinvent the wheel. There are a lot of organizations out here doing the work looking for people to volunteer. You don't have to start an organization, let's start a movement. You can go right down to Operation Push or Chicago Votes, or, I mean, those are the first that popped in my head. I mean, there are hundreds of other civic organizations. The Mikva Challenge is another one in the city of Chicago. There are lots of organizations doing the work around the city. Go call one of them up, get engaged and say, hey, can I come to an event or whatever? That's how I got involved. I got involved doing that. I've started working on campaigns. I worked on President Obama's senatorial campaign back in 2004. and some other things. And those are really good ways just to get involved with like-minded people. And then once you do that, then they go, oh, well, you know, this thing is happening too. Young people have the freedom and flexibility to do those kinds of things. And so I would do that. And then I think number 3, I think continue to educate yourself, because as I found in my early work, it's one thing to be a college student in these organizations. It's another thing when you walk in at a higher level, and a level where you can actually affect some significant change. So don't give up on your education. It's not mutually exclusive. And I think that you can make a difference. So find the issue, find the organization, keep learning. And I think in that way, that is how you get engaged. And once again, social media is such a phenomenal tool. And you have Gen Zs, millennials, right? let me just say this for the record, I ain't that far from the millennials. I know y'all consider me Professor Old, all other kind of stuff. I'm in Generation X, just for the record. And we are, you know, we're right next to the millennials. And some of us are like borderline, I'm not borderline, but some of us are right, you know, right there, whatever. So we're not that, oh, we're the hip hop generation, all this, you know. So, so we understand it too.
I'll let you come back to my generation.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So, yeah.
Speaking of, you know, the younger generation, what are your thoughts? What are your reactions to the celebrities? Most recently, Ice Cube, who met with President Trump to talk about the Black agenda. One, but specifically, he had a 27-page document on what we want for our Black people. Why is it a bad or a negative reaction that one, he even met with President Trump? Shouldn't we want to meet with the commander-in-chief to voice our concerns and address the issues that we feel needs to be heard? And 2, again, what are your thoughts about Ice Cube with his 27-page?
Sure. So one of the things that I have been disappointed by in our culture is our obsession with celebrity. It's the reason why Donald Trump is our president right now. He has no qualifications to really be the president, and yet Americans find celebrity to be intriguing. In the same way, I think Ice Cube and Kanye and other people like that are the same way. Now, I don't doubt that these folks are powerful. They have money. They have resources. They have influence, which is very important. I'm glad to see them using their resources and their influence for something positive. But there are a lot of folks who've been out here working on these issues for a long time, Rashanah. And we could, you know, say it again?
NWA, Ice Cube and NWA, they've been talking about these issues. So I think
they have.
Separate from Kanye, because it felt like Kanye was putting on the show. I mean, I did read the 27-page document. It was this is what we want. Anybody who is trying to push forth the agenda of the Black community, I'm not against them. But I don't have any hope that this president has any interest in moving forward the issues of the Black community. I want to say that very clear. He's disrespected minorities from day one, and women. And the idea that this president, honestly, Nancy Pelosi hasn't talked to him in a year. For me, I think you have to figure out who you're dealing with. And in this situation, in his last year, potentially, last few months, potentially here, I would rather see Ice Cube and other people spend their efforts trying to get him out of office and moving our agenda forward that way. If President Trump was interested in the Black community and an agenda, he would have done something 4 years ago. He did not. What's at stake if this administration continues past 2020? What's at stake for Black people? If President Trump is reelected.
Yeah, our very existence in this country is at stake. See, what you must understand is Mary Flowers, who's my state representative, I've had her come speak to my class a bunch of times, and she'd be happy to hear me quoting her. She probably won't hear this, but she'd be happy to hear me quoting her. But she tells my students a couple times, she said that Black people in this country have lost a sense of outrage. The beauty of what happened this summer was that people found their outrage. And they said, we're not going to stand by and watch somebody like George Floyd get killed. We're not going to stand by and watch somebody like Breonna Taylor get killed. We're not going to do that, right? And so we're going to stand up and we're going to fight. And that's important and that's powerful. And so this president, what is at stake is, let me just give you, if I could for a moment, I'm going to give you a little litany of what this president's administration has made. And I have an article I want to share with you because I've went through all of this, but let me say this about race relations. White nationalist groups have grown 55% since this president came into office. Hate crimes have almost tripled in this country since he came into office. He started his presidency, his campaign, by insulting Mexicans. He has insulted veterans. He has insulted women. He has insulted the African-American community. I can't tell you how many times, with the audacity to say that he's the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln for Black people. He ought to, I mean, it's insulting. He told the NFL players that they were SOBs for protesting. They have no right to protest police brutality. He tried to he's taking out 1619 curriculum out of the schools. He doesn't want us teaching about our history in this country. People say that they don't know if he's racist. I always tell them, if he's not racist, who is? What would he need to do to prove to you that he does not have your interests at heart? He bragged in 2018 at the Naval Academy that his ancestors had tamed a continent, right, in terms of killing Native Americans in massive ways. So you can look at all of these things. Maya Angelou says that when someone shows you who they are, you ought to believe them. Right. This man has shown us who he is from day one. His lawsuit that he had against discriminatory policies in his housing in New York, taking out the ad against the Central Park Five, never apologizing about that, right? These kids were unjustly incarcerated for years. This man is no friend of the Black community. And the idea that he's even meeting with Ice Cube right now is more about politics than it is about anything else.
Well, what about, the monies to HBCUs, billion?
Sure.
What about the First Step Act? What about the issue criminal justice reform that he's at the forefront of? Black people are saying, you have Black people saying that he's putting Black people's needs first, the first time ever a president has put our needs first. Also, bailouts and the stimulus, giving monies, $1,200 checks. What do you say to that?
So let me flip that. So number one, the stimulus is a joke. We are in the worst economic downturn since the 1930s, and we've gotten one check in 7 months for $1,200. Really? That's a joke, okay? African Americans in this city alone represent 70% of the COVID cases, and he has called this thing a hoax and not done anything at the national level to mandate mask wearing, to mandate testing, to make testing free and available. So Black people are dying, right? And that's not of a concern to him. The HBCU funding situation, he did push to create a better funding stream for HBCUs, but he cut the MAP program so the schools can get money and the students can't attend because they can't afford to go, right? He cut the student loan forgiveness program. So African Americans are more likely to take student loans out in college, and this man cut the forgiveness program to essentially to be non-existent. So when you look at this, I could go through all the things. The idea of the Black unemployment rate is a joke. President Obama inherited the worst economy that we've had in 80 years in this country, moved the economy in the right direction. President Trump only jumped on those gains. The economy has grown. The Obama economy has grown. He has not messed it up, but he actually has slowed it down. It's actually growing at a slower rate than it was under the Obama administration. So when Black people look at that, it's interesting because, let's say we do have some economic gains. To what end, right? If there's a civil war, which I don't know about you, when I look at what is happening with the militia groups around this country, with the white nationalist groups and the feeling of empowerment, they love President Trump. It's kind of like somebody abusing you and then giving you $5 on the back end after they beat you up. Are you going to then go, oh, thanks for the money, you're a good guy? They just slapped you in the face. And I think he's been slapping us in the face since he came into this position. And I think it's insulting that Black people would say, oh, somebody gave me a check or somebody gave me a little student funding. Oh, and by the way, the criminal justice thing, let me say this real quickly too, because that's a farce, right? He has let a few people out based on some celebrity desires, that sort of thing. President Obama, by comparison, created this fair sentencing piece of legislation, which shrunk the gap between the sentencing someone would get for powdered cocaine and for crack cocaine. And obviously we know there was a huge disparity. President Obama shrunk that gap. This president has done nothing for that. He's not done any real criminal justice reform. It is all smoke and mirrors, and we have to be more intelligent than that, than to believe and fall for the okie doke.
Yeah, Williams, I appreciate this commentary and the interview. As we wind down and wrap up, November 3rd is what, less than 2 weeks away, probably less than about 2 weeks away.
Yeah.
What do you say? What's your advice to those who still feel they're undecided between Democrat, Republican, or even the two choices? What would your advice be? People often forget we do have a third option. So we have a third option. What would your advice be? Because some people are saying they're going to just sit this out, or they're going to write Kanye West's name in. What do you say to that?
There could not be a more important election than I've seen in my lifetime. I'm 44 years old. I've never seen an election more consequential than the one we're in right now. And I mean that with all of my heart. It breaks my heart to hear people say that. There are third options. I've actually voted for third parties before. Now is not the time. I hate to say it, Kanye is a bit of a distraction at this point, because you're either going to have Joe Biden or you're going to have Donald Trump again. And if you want to empower white supremacists, if you want to negate the idea of police brutality, once again, this man has said these people don't even have a right to, you don't even have a right to protest police brutality. And he's used the language of racism in telling people in the suburbs that they should be afraid that you're coming to their suburbs, talking about us, by the way. This idea of the police are kind of always right in his mind. These things are a direct threat to Black people's existence in this country. And so I cannot convey in a more direct way that you need to do everything you can to try to remove this man. I'm not suggesting that Joe Biden is the savior, but I am suggesting that this experiment, this has to end. What has happened with racism in this country is that it has always existed, but he has empowered it, he has fueled it, he has given it safe quarters in the White House. And I'm telling you guys, what he has started is not going away anytime soon. And we're going to bear the brunt of this. And we have to change the tone of this country. Our very lives depend on it.
Ted Williams, the chairman of social science at Kennedy King College and political science professor at Kennedy King College here in Chicago on the South Side. Thank you so much. I appreciate this commentary and interview.
Thank you so much, Rashanah. You got me worked up now. I'm all like excited. I'm ready to go. I'm about to go watch this debate, and then I'm going to come back on again. I'm glad we talked about this because we got to get out and vote, folks. We have to get out and vote. And if you don't believe still, Rashanah, give them my phone number. They can call me. I will talk to them directly because every vote matters.
You have a website where people can contact you and reach out to you directly? Or
yes. So, my website is tedwilliams3rd.com, Ted Williams 3 I's, Facebook, Ted Williams III, YouTube, Ted Williams III, Twitter, Ted Williams III, Instagram, Change Speaker. I'm all over, so you can please check out. I'd love to talk to you. I love talking to people about this. Come take a class at Kennedy King, that sort of thing. So.
Absolutely. I think we need people to be civically engaged. It's our civic duty as Americans. So again, awesome. I appreciate this. Thank you. Enjoy the debate. We'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much.